Hello, everyone. I am Madelene Mielke, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. I am thrilled to welcome you to the annual APAICS Tech Summit. We are honored to have you all here today to discuss the evolving landscape of technology and the impact that these changes have on the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, AA, and NHPI community. This summit brings together nonprofit and corporate leaders, subject matter experts, and elected officials to engage in bipartisan policy discussions about the complexities and diverse challenges and opportunities across the tech industry. We are honored to have a distinguished group of speakers who will share their insights and expertise on how technology has shaped our political, social, and economic landscapes, and how it will continue to impact our communities in the future. From building our digital infrastructure in the US and preparing the digital workforce to promoting digital wellness, this summit will help to unpack the most pressing issues in the technology sector and how they impact our AA and NHPI community. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to our summit partners, Amazon, Apple, AT&T, Comcast, CTIA, Dell, DoorDash, Toyota, Charter, Entertainment Software Association, Microsoft, Netflix, Salesforce, T-Mobile, and all of our special guest speakers, panelists, and moderators. Your support enables APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander participation and representation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elected office. Our next speaker is KPAC Senate Associate Member Senator Cory Booker. Senator Booker was first elected in a special election in 2013 and is the first African-American senator from New Jersey. He currently sits on the Judiciary Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, the Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, and the Small Business Committee. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Senator Booker.
I want to express my deep gratitude for inviting me to join you virtually at this year's APAICS Tech Summit. This summit is so important. In the United States, currently 24 million people in our nation lack access to high-speed internet, and many more cannot connect due to gaps in digital equity and literacy. And despite the fact that 95% of English-speaking Asian Americans use the internet, a significant portion of the AA-NHPI community still lacks reliable internet access. This is mainly because studies provide an incomplete picture, as they often aggregate data from over 20 different ethnicities, skewing the perspective on broadband access. Key indicators such as educational attainment, income levels, and English proficiency reveal disparities among different ethnic groups within the AA-NHPI community. So to help states and communities address some of these issues, Congress has appropriated billions of dollars from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the American Rescue Plan, championed by Democrats in Congress and signed by President Biden. But we must take into account the unique needs of marginalized communities to ensure that initiatives to bridge the digital divide are truly effective. That is why this summit is necessary, to bringing attention to the need for a more inclusive digital landscape. I want to express my gratitude once again and wish everyone a highly productive and successful summit. Rest assured, I'm going to continue to work with my colleagues in Congress to address our nation's digital divide so that we can create a more equitable and connected future for all. But you all are critical to this mission, critical to making sure that we create a nation where everyone has access to the technologies we need to thrive in this economy and the one of the future.
Thank you for all of your remarks. It is truly an honor to hear from such esteemed speakers. Our first panel of the APAICS Tech Summit is Building Our Digital Infrastructure. Although studies show Asian Americans are the most digitally connected community in America, there is still a significant portion of the AA and NHPI community that still lacks reliable internet access, leading to a growing digital divide. As government programs work to address the existing gaps, the most marginalized AA and NHPI communities have unique needs that must be considered for these programs to be effective. This panel will explore the challenges and opportunities surrounding funding and infrastructure in bridging this digital divide, and how the AA and NHPI community can have a seat at the table when it comes to decision-making for digital infrastructure projects. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tu Nguyen. Tu is the Executive Director of OCA National. A graduate from Rice University with degrees in chemistry and sociology, Tu entered the nonprofit sector through organizing on campus and bridging partnerships between student groups and local organizations. Tu oversees storytelling, advocacy, relationships, and operations for OCA. Let's give a warm welcome to Tu and our panelists.
Thank you so much, Madeline, for the kind introduction. I'm really excited to be on this side of the panel where I've participated as a panelist before, and to moderate some of my colleagues and new friends in this digital literacy and digital equity space. Just to start off, I want to introduce the panel again to you all. We have Kate Black, founder and CEO of K Black Strategies, Lily Ho, president and co-founder of Delta Chinatown Initiative, Mario Salazar, executive director of public policy at Comcast NBC Universal, and Meredith Williams, assistant vice president for the executive branch at AT&T. And to get us started, I wanted to have each of you just introduce a little bit more about yourself, but specifically the work you do related to digital divide. And what do you think of when you hear the phrase digital infrastructure? Kate, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you so much for having us today and for hosting this conversation. My name is Kate Black. I'm the CEO and founder of K Black Strategies. I've been a consultant independently for a year, and I spent 5 years in the federal government, most recently as chief policy advisor to FCC chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. And in that role, I spent a lot of time thinking about this exact question. During the pandemic, I think we all realized the utility that internet service has in our lives for work, for school, healthcare, even just connecting with friends and family in a really difficult time when we couldn't make those connections in person. So when I think about digital infrastructure, especially with all of the federal resources coming out to help close the digital divide, I think about digital infrastructure in the sense of the networks and the connections that we use every day to participate fully in the digital economy, to connect with friends and family, and to really have a fair shot at modern communications and access.
Thanks, Kate. Meredith?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm Meredith Williams. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Executive Branch at AT&T. And what that means in plain English is that I work with a number of the federal executive branch agencies on policy issues that impact AT&T. I've been with the company for about 4.5 years. And really for the past 3 years, the majority of my time has been focused on helping the company work with public sector to help close the digital divide. And we really think about it as sort of 3 different barriers for the digital divide. The first is access, and that sort of answers your question about infrastructure. Those are the pipes that run to get us all online. But there are also issues around affordability and around adoption. And without solving all 3 of those things, you really are not going to be able to close the digital divide. And I don't have a lot more to add to what Kate said about digital infrastructure, but I'll just say that this challenge has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Especially Asian American households lack the same access. In places like California, they're 7 or 8 percentage points less likely than white households to have internet access. And so this is a very timely and important conversation. I'm really glad that we're having it. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Mario?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mario Salazar. I'm Executive Director of Public Policy for Comcast NBC Universal here in Washington, D.C. I have been in the role for a little under 2 years now, and very thankful to be here with all of you and to tackle some pretty important issues today. I agree with all that's been said about the importance of the internet. And coming out of COVID, a lot of us, I think, on this call agree that that the internet has become essential, right? And the last 2 or 3 years, we've really seen a lot of attention being given to close the digital divide. So, being that I'm in Washington, D.C., being that I'm on the public policy team, keep a keen eye on a lot of the federal programs that are currently being rolled out to close the digital divide, right? Take a look at the Capital Projects Fund that's being overseen by Treasury, the BEAD program, which is being overseen by NTIA, and the Affordable Connectivity Program, right? So there's all these unprecedented resources that are going towards fixing the digital divide. When I think about the digital divide and digital infrastructure, kind of touching on what Meredith spoke about just a moment ago, talking about availability versus adoption, right? Right now in the United States, depending on the estimate, there's about 80 million people that are without broadband. Again, based on the estimate, about 7 million of those 80 million people live in areas that are unconnected. They don't have a physical plug in their home to access high-speed broadband. So we're taking a look at about 73 million people who live in areas that you would presume to be connected that have not adopted, right? And so, it's really a two-pronged issue, talking about availability and adoption, agreeing with my friend from AT&T about that and how to tackle all that. So it's a very interesting issue, and I think the infrastructure encompasses really both.
Thank you, Mario, for that. And Lily, I'll go to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lily Ho. I started an advocacy organization for Chinatown in San Francisco during the pandemic, Delta Chinatown Initiative. During the pandemic, Chinatown was hit hardest. It was hit the earliest and took the longest to recover. So my organization did advocacy work around families living in SROs, to food insecurity, and with the rise of anti-Asian hate, I sought out to put in security cameras. And in doing so, I stumbled upon how vast and deep the digital divide issue is in Chinatown. And since then, I've been working on trying to fix that problem. When I think about digital infrastructure, those terms specifically, I think about survival. It is essential to the survival of our Chinatown. Chinatowns across North America are dying. And without basic things like broadband internet, we're doomed. Chinatown is a neighborhood that has always been just isolated. It's an ethnic enclave, specifically created for survival of the community. And it's come to a point in time where if we don't have broadband internet, we risk losing the entire neighborhood altogether.
Thank you for sharing, Lily. And this is actually a really great transition because going into more specific examples of what Mario was mentioning about Americans nationwide really not having being connected, not being serviced, basically. Like there is no internet provider in the area. I think SF Chinatown is really interesting because San Francisco Bay Area, known to be the tech capital in the US, Silicon Valley. What can you describe then, Lily? What are the biggest challenges / obstacles that you're seeing in the Chinatown or Asian American Pacific Islander community to access internet? Can you give some stories that you may have encountered or what you're seeing in your work when you were installing the security cameras?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. I mean, it's a question that I was asking up and down the street myself. Why is this going on? We are literally in the heart of Silicon Valley. Chinatown in San Francisco is located right next to the financial district. So literally across the street from Kearny Street, you've got the headquarters of global law firms, of tech companies, like an Amazon-owned companies across the street. Startups are in these buildings. And you cross the street and you might as well step back 100 years in time. The groundwork was never laid. The telecommunications companies never laid the groundwork. They never built the infrastructure. We are in the neighborhood is working off of internet, off of telephone lines. It's like DSL speed. And what the neighborhood looks like is this. It's the most dense population outside of Manhattan. There are 24,000 residents that live in the area. It is also the second poorest community in San Francisco, right after the Tenderloin. And we're talking about like income per capita. And it is home to hundreds of businesses. And they're micro businesses. They're not, your standard SMB in the terms that the corporate world would think of an SMB. They're mom and pop shops. You would walk into any shop in Chinatown, and you are most likely dealing with the owner, who's dealing with everything else that has to do with running a business, supplies, accounting, marketing, all of that. So it's not really been a community that has been able to advocate for itself around this just lack of speed of internet. I mean, there are stories over and over again that they will call AT&T, they'll call Comcast, and they'll pay a little bit more for an upgrade, and nothing happens. And it's because the speed is just not there. The infrastructure is not there. The impact of this is that you see like firsthand what true digital divide looks like. The children who live in the neighborhood weren't able to go to school during the pandemic. The small businesses in every other neighborhood in San Francisco were so like food delivery heavy and, all new tech apps heavy. They weren't able to leverage food deliveries because they never had food delivery apps, Grubhub or Uber Eats. It was just something that the neighborhood never caught on to because of the lack of stable internet. We were talking about shops that would rather deal in cash than deal with an unstable POS system. Every shop in Chinatown can tell you that they've encountered a situation where someone tried to run a credit card and they had to wait there 20 minutes and it was just not even worth it. It's just easier to put up a sign and say, go to the ATM down the block. And yeah, I mean, honestly, when we look at how different these businesses operate versus anything else in Silicon Valley, it's really fascinating, for one. And initially, you may think that this is just a cultural situation. This is just how these businesses are used to operating. I mean, I used to think that too, like they just would rather deal in cash. But actually, it's because there isn't any internet. They would rather deal in cash because the internet was never there for them. They would rather deal with a standard brick and mortar operation than deal with shipping online because they don't have the infrastructure to have a website to do drop shipments. It's also part of the conversation of what Chinatown should look like. It's been around for 175 years, our Chinatown in San Francisco. And consistently, it's always had a conversation around preservation versus modernization. It is an ongoing conversation. It will probably never end. But at this inflection point of where we are in 2023, when so much of the economy is based on the requirement to have some sort of online presence, even just to find you or be on Yelp, like having decent internet is key to the survival of the entire neighborhood. We are extremely lucky that we still exist. New York, they're building a mega jail. Philadelphia, they're building a stadium. We're extremely lucky that we still have the buildings to define Chinatown in San Francisco. But if we don't fix this internet issue, no one can run a business there. People can't live there. People can't move in and work remotely. And it will continue to be an extremely impoverished community.
Thanks for sharing that story, Lily. I think that resonates even to communities nationwide. I mean, that's availability and adoption. I'll say I'm from Houston and my mother's nail salon of 20 years also still uses two telephone ports, one for the credit card machine and one for the telephone. So we'll talk about, digital literacy in a little bit too, but I want to move to Kate, if you can share, Lily's example was from SF Chinatown. Can you shed some light on where are the communities facing these challenges of accessing broadband that maybe folks don't realize?
Well, I think Lily's story is really emblematic of a shift, I think, in the dialogue that has happened, but it still needs to happen around the digital divide. I think for too long, people thought it was just a rural problem, right? That it was just about where the fiber went and where it didn't go. And I think colloquially, there was a notion that this was just for those furthest out communities, the last house on the street. We still have that problem, but what Lily's describing too is that it is also an urban problem. The FCC has new broadband maps that show where access is and is not in this country. And for the first time, we're going location by location. It's not perfect, it's iterative over time. But that, I think, at least, the chairwoman likes to say, you can't solve what you can't measure. And so that is, I think, a starting point. The other thing that I think is helpful is, and I think Mario mentioned this, the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is the nation's, largest ever broadband affordability program. I came out of pandemic, but it's having, over 20 million households right now subscribed. And you look at the map, the data, which you can go down to the zip code and county level, it's urban and rural. Right? It's in every state, every community. There are people who are relying on a program to afford the service that they have. And I think both those data points are telling that this is no longer a rural versus urban dialogue. It's really an everywhere and everyone conversation.
That's for sure. Thank you, Kate. And Mario, Meredith, I don't know if you want to add anything about what else you've observed as providers in terms of like the biggest challenges and obstacles. Mario, I don't know if you want to chime in first.
Yeah, sure. So I think that I agree that the urban availability gap most definitely exists. And to Kate's point, we now see those gaps quite literally laid out on the map. I think that I would add that a lot of the challenges in urban areas truly require boots on the ground, companies like ours and like Meredith's going into the community and connecting with local stakeholders and learning where these gaps exist and the reasons why they exist. That's something that we're seeing in a lot of urban areas, especially for SROs and multifamily dwelling units, is a building owner, for example, is usually not very present in the neighborhood and it's hard to get to so that you could physically connect and add the infrastructure to the building to give residents the connectivity they need. And how do you solve that? You solve it by being on the ground, by walking the blocks, by connecting with community leaders. And proud to say that's something that Comcast is doing pretty actively. I would say in some areas too, you have a lot of regulatory issues and a lot of regulatory roadblocks at the local level that a lot of companies kind of have to work through and manage, which slows down the process a great deal as well. But a lot of this is happening on a case-by-case basis across the country, and it really requires people on the ground knowing the communities and working with the communities again to fill those gaps and to get everybody connected.
Yeah, Meredith?
No, I mean, I think Mario covered some really important points, especially about, getting into the buildings. I mean, this is something that we deal with on a daily basis. We're like, we can draw a fiber line all the way up to that building, but if the building owner doesn't answer, doesn't want to let us in, we don't have any recourse to actually go in there and connect the residents. So I think that that's definitely an obstacle that companies face. But, Lily really touched on the real impact of not having this reliable internet access, how detrimental it is, how it can lead to like missed opportunities, how it's preventing the communities from growing. And so I think that's important to think about. And it's important for us and for the government agencies and all of us to figure out like, how can we overcome these other barriers that are less obvious, if you will. It's okay, there's no access to the building, but you have to figure out the why. What is the why? The other thing I would just touch on briefly is, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, is, if people haven't had access to reliable internet before, their ability to use it, their ability to use all these apps, their ability to be safe online, all of those things are also skills that we need to be providing the people with when they're getting online, because you want to help them overcome the barriers that not being online has put in front of them, but you don't want to create new barriers because they're not able to be online in a safe way, in a way that's productive for them, that allows them to grow their business, to market their business, and all of these other things that are so important for that sort of next step there. So those are some of the issues we're thinking about at AT&T.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Meredith. And I want to kind of actually begin to touch base on the adoption piece, right? Which is a part of infrastructure. We can lay down lines and put up the wireless, but if folks don't know how to use it, that's troublesome as well. So why don't we start off with you, Meredith, because I know AT&T has a few programs and also quite a few community partners. But how has your organization responded to the lack of resources for the underserved communities of color? I don't know if you have a few partnerships you want to share or speak a little bit about AT&T's initiatives on that.
I'm happy to, and I think Mario and I are going to have some similar examples, but I think that the reason that they'll be similar is because they are part of the things that we know work. So the first is, and Mario touched on this, is being in the community. So we have partnered with community organizations, and I believe just last week it was 26 cities to build, we call them connected learning centers. Other companies call them something slightly different, but it's basically a digital hub in the local communities so that people can learn to be online. They can get online. They can get online so that they can subscribe to the Affordable Connectivity Program and all of those important things. And then we also, have been working with organizations to distribute devices, because that's also another barrier, right? If you have the connection, but you don't have a computer to use it on, it's not going to give you the same level of engagement online as you would have basically on your mobile device or something else. And then the third is, again, about digital literacy, teaching people to be online, teaching them to be safe online, teaching parents how to make sure their kids are safe online. And so we, partnered with the Public Library Association to launch a series of digital literacy courses that are happening both virtually and then also in libraries around the country for people to come in and learn to do the things they need to do online. And again, this doesn't address the issue that Lily talked about the businesses in Chinatown, but it does address, giving people a way to access being online, a way to learn new skills, a way to sign up for ACP, a way to provide input to the FCC broadband maps so they can tell the FCC that my household does not yet have internet. And without being online, it's sometimes hard to be able to even raise the white flag for help and flag the issues that are keeping you from getting online. So those are just a couple of things we have instituted, and I'm sure Mario's got others to share as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Meredith. I know we definitely do the outreach on that too. But Lily, I want to turn to you and wonder, since your beginning engagement with or confrontation of the digital divide in SF Chinatown, what resources have you been able to access for SF Chinatown, either like when you were installing the security cameras and since then to help the business owners, what resources, or actually what lack of resources have you not been able to get to for the community?
The security camera situation is completely different. We were able to partner with other partners that were very helpful in installing security cameras. In terms of internet and broadband infrastructure, we've received zero support. We have had ongoing meetings with Comcast. We have met with AT&T as well. I've met with everyone who's willing to talk to me. I am willing to walk you into these buildings, and I have to show you that actually entering the building is not a real obstacle. There are other obstacles, and the main obstacle here is that it does require will. It requires political will, and our local electeds have been largely silent on this issue. It requires the will of corporations, and I know you guys here on this call, you guys work in a different arm of your company, but the actual business units that would be doing the installations, their KPIs are completely different. And that's something internal that maybe requires more incentive, because it's not just entering the building and it's not just affordability for the community. I think the community has done a pretty good job of letting everybody know that, that the cost of internet can be income dependent, and they all take advantage of that. But bringing the lines to the buildings is extremely cost prohibitive. I've seen quotes as high as $80,000. The residents aren't going to pay for that, and the small businesses can't afford it. And the building owners have no incentive to do that for their residents. The conversations that I've had are, quite appalling, to be frank. They're quite appalling in terms of how companies look at incentives. And so, what I just try to do is to circumvent all of that. I mean, everyone is motivated by incentives and accountability. I think platforms like this are really important to drive the conversation further. The media has been a good source of support to drive that conversation and bring awareness as well. And when there's awareness, there's desire for individuals like ourselves, regardless of who we work for or what we advocate for. We can all be advocates within our own companies and organizations and communities to push for change.
Thanks, Lily. I'm also curious if you were able to turn to either like other resources or companies or even devices to help the small business owners specifically with like their point of sale systems that you mentioned earlier, which was a point of a big obstacle point for many. Were you able to partner with other groups for that?
Yeah, I mean, so, San Francisco is the heart of Silicon Valley. We've been really in touch. The pandemic exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in the community, but it's also really brought in people who want to help and support the community as well. And we are very lucky to have a very generous and really supportive community in San Francisco Bay Area. And when there were companies like Square, who, for example, had a new tablet that they wanted to install, they reached out to the community, and the community helped do the on-the-ground legwork to talk to the businesses to show them, like, this is what it's like if you had a POS system, and here's a tablet, and you just pay this fee. And they had to rethink and redo how their cash flow system works. But once they are able to do that, they can see that there is more revenue. People do tip higher if they are able to use a point of sale system or their credit cards. And all of this is really new tech. I mean, there's been a lot of new leapfrog technology that's come out during the dead years of the pandemic. For example, some of these machines and tablets, you can be offline for a few hours, and the machine will kick in and run the credit card when it's back online. And some of them will run off of your cell phone service instead of traditional broadband. And all of this has just been within the last year or so. Also new opportunity is like the microwave tech for broadband to be brought over antenna lines that can be installed on the roof rather than digging in through concrete, which is much faster, easier, doesn't require certain permitting from the city, and less disruption to the community, and generally is cheaper. So those have been really terrific, but I think all of those, like any new and ongoing delivery of any leapfrog technology, is dependent on all other things like hardware, supply chain for hardware, cloud computing space, and all of it. But I am confident that the issues that we raise in Chinatown has brought in a broader community of tech support to help us discover new options. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Lily. And I think what I'm hearing coming out of this too is language access is a huge piece of this in terms of accessibility and then adoption, right? In terms of signing up for the programs that can get you internet access, and then also using the internet, which largely, predominantly largely operates in English right now. So, right. So I want to kick it over real quick to Kate to close out this question in terms of either from your time at the FCC or now as a consultant, what resources were put out? I know earlier some folks had mentioned BEAD and ACP through ARPA. I think if there's another program, I don't remember. So Kate, like what kind of resources were put out there that you've seen folks pick up or are still going to be available in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I think through the kind of pandemic and then post-pandemic, we've seen kind of a once-in-a-generation acknowledgement of funding from the federal government to help close the digital divide. We're talking tens and tens of billions of dollars. The Affordable Connectivity Program was mentioned, the Capital Projects Fund was mentioned. Most recently, the Biden administration announced, I think, upwards of $40 billion going out to states through the BEAD program. And that program is really unique because it's based on the FCC broadband maps that I mentioned, that allocation by state. So it's done with a certain amount of nuanced about, which states have coverage where and how much money do we need to actually deploy the lines. But those funds also require states to have digital equity planning as a part of that broadband work. And that's one thing that I also wanted to mention, which was, with all of this historic funding coming out, I think it's really important for anyone working kind of in and around government at the federal, state, or local level is to really find partners who are not your kind of usual digital equity subjects, right? Because I think now, because of the necessary use of the internet for all pieces of our daily lives, I think, reaching out to, your non-traditional organizations and having a digital equity conversation is so important. So churches and schools and other faith-based organizations, libraries, organizations like Lily's, who, maybe 5 years ago, the, digital access and affordability and equity was not, maybe a part of the mission, but now it certainly probably is and has to be. I kind of have a saying where no matter what your number one issue is, your second issue has to be broadband access and affordability, because you can't get to number one without it. So I think as folks are looking at partners, I think it's really important to kind of broaden the dialogue about, who's in this space with us, because I think that will only make it more fruitful. So a lot of money coming out, a lot of, lines being put in the ground and conversations about broadband. And I think it's just important for those conversations to be as robust as possible.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, putting my OCA hat on, like as a 50-year-old civil rights organization, we've now identified as the digital divide as our number one policy and programming priority, because like Lily mentioned and everyone on the mention, internet access is now a need, not a want. And so that's really important to identify. And going into having a seat at the table in these conversations about where the money goes, and Lily mentioned too about holding elected officials accountable. I want us to touch on what can the government do to improve digital infrastructure, and what kind of partnerships does that require in with the private sector, so the companies providing broadband services, and community groups such as mine or Lily's. And so Mara, I'd like for you to chime in here and start off the discussion there.
Yeah. So really two ways, right, to address both of the issues I think we've talked about a lot here today. I think it's a little bit easier to talk about the availability piece, right? Simply put, that's building networks where they don't currently exist, both in urban areas and in rural areas, and to try to circumvent all the geographical challenges that come with that. So I think that's not simple, but I think it's a little bit easier to talk about. When you move to the adoption piece, like I mentioned at the top, there are far more people that are unadopted in areas that are already connected versus folks that lack a connection at all. And I think we're starting to go down this road a little bit. I think that's where digital navigators can play a big role, right? I know OCA, for instance, congratulations too on the grant that you all received to expand digital navigator work. But the role that community organizations like yours and Lily's can play here are priceless, right? They go without saying. If you think about why the digital adoption gap exists in the first place, there have been several studies that have been done. One in Chicago in particular found that lack of perceived relevance was one of the leading causes for folks not to plug in, right? Simply put, they didn't see that it was relevant to their daily lives. What are the causes of that? I mean, there could be a multitude of things. They can be lack of digital skills. They could be digital illiteracy. And that's where organizations like yours and Lily's can play a role in getting folks connected, not only to the ACP, but also to income constrained programs that are offered by companies like us, Internet Essentials, our Internet Essentials program. And when you couple that with ACP, it makes it essentially free. So the barrier of cost is reduced significantly, but then the barrier of digital literacy still kind of exists, right? And I think for the Asian American community in particular, this is a challenge given the need for data disaggregation, right? On paper, the whole model minority myth thing on paper, it'll show that Asian Americans are highly connected to the internet as a group, right? But when you get that data and you break it down, you take a look at the more working class communities that live in the MDUs, that live in places like rural Fresno, and the need for them to plug in. That's where organizations like you all, who know the ins and outs of these communities, can play a huge role on the adoption front. One last thing I'll say about the availability piece, as stakeholders and governments across the country start to take a look at grant applications, I think it's important for them to think beyond the build, right? I think they want to think beyond just companies that can lay the pipe and build the network and lay the fiber. They want to look at companies that have track records working with communities, that are committed to things like innovation, right? There's no such thing as future-proof broadband. That's something we like to say. What's fast today may not be fast tomorrow and may not meet the needs of future consumers. So you want to partner with folks that are continuously investing, that care about things like cybersecurity, and then have a track record for delivering. And most importantly, I think folks that have the resources to continuously operate a network without the need for future government investments, right? Because we've said this a lot on this call today. This truly is a once in a generation thing. I don't think we can expect another $40 billion in BEAD funds in 5 or 6 years, right? This is a one-shot deal. So we want to make sure that the government is partnering with builders that can get that done without the need for future help.
Thank you, Mario, for that really comprehensive overview. And I want to jump back to Kate, actually, if you have any insight on like data disaggregation on that the FCC may have had. And then what is your forecast now that you're out of the FCC? Perhaps you can touch base on this. Like, we know the ACP program was funded through, 2024. And I know a number of us are advocating for the continued funding for ACP. What do you think the future of ACP may look like post 2024?
Oh, wow. What a heavy question. I'm not a betting woman, so I'll take the first question first. I think, there's a lot of data that can be gleaned from the Affordable Connectivity Program, and folks can see more of that on the FCC's ACP website, or USAC, the administrator, has a lot of available data on the enrollment. We can learn about how many people and where they are in the program. We can also learn, there are multiple entry points into the program through other federal assistance programs like SNAP, the Lifeline program, Medicaid. And so we can learn how people are coming into the program. We can also learn, and this has been really helpful, age breakdown. A lot of people, I think, have this idea that older folks don't get online, but actually close to 50% of the 20 million households are above the age of 50 in the program. And I think coming out of the pandemic, a lot of older people realized that they needed the internet to kind of participate in all the ways that we've discussed today. And so they are, especially those on fixed incomes, signing up for this affordability program. So that gets to your last question about, what is the fate of this very critical program? As someone who's doing a lot of conversations with a lot of folks about it, this is one where I think right now sharing stories about how impactful it is, how special it is for the unique households who are in this program, who are, fundamentally facing a connectivity cliff when this ends, possibly early next year. I think making sure that those stories are shared in your community with your local, state, and federal officials is super, super important right now. I don't know what's going to happen with the program, but I know there's so many people fighting to save it. And I know we'll all be working together to hopefully make sure that people can get the access they need at an affordable price.
Thank you, Kate. And I mean, I agree. I think at least it got the ball rolling. And I know at least for the partners on this call and others that I have many broadband service providers have had affordable internet plans. And so hopefully, it's not going to be the end. But Meredith, want to come down to a state and local level in terms of government and community and private sector partnerships, because I know Lily's community lies in a big AT&T serviced areas. And when it comes to these conversations about accessibility, right? It's like 5G versus wireless versus fiber. I know conversations are now talking about 10G, right? So Mario, you're talking about you can't future-proof internet. That's so true. What would you like to see, Meredith, or do you see as needed from private community and government to really address this availability problem in places like San Francisco?
I mean, I think the first thing that, I would touch on, and we've talked about it earlier, is the local input and feedback into the FCC broadband maps. That's so important. I mean, as Kate said earlier, you can't fix what you can't measure. If you don't have that really like finite detail about where the lack of access is, I think that's really important. I think, especially as a part of the BEAD program, there are a lot of requirements for local stakeholder engagement that the states have to do to get that feedback and participation as they're developing their programs and their rules and their plans. And so, this is a place where, yes, the state should be reaching out to organizations like Lily's or yours and getting this information. They may not be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't get to provide feedback. So I'm going to do my NTIA plug. I know there's no NTIA on this call, but they have a website, Internet for All. On that website, they list their federal program officer in every state. So this is the NTIA person basically liaisoning with the states to make sure that they're incorporating all the things they need to do in their plans for BEAD. And so their name and their email is on that website. It's open to the public. Anyone can go in there and provide that feedback. And so I really encourage folks to do that if they don't feel like they've been encouraged to provide feedback in other ways. Because at the end of the day, you also talked a little about sort of wireless versus fiber and everything else. Understanding what's going on the ground in each community really helps us, large providers, small providers, everyone know what is the best type of service to provide somewhere. Lily talked about there are ways to provide connectivity that may not involve digging up streets. Is that a short-term solution while we work and find funding for more expensive and longer-term solutions? Like, that could be. Can, wireless sometimes be the first sort of the first way, short-term way, again, to solve the digital divide as you're building up fiber, which takes more time and, again, involves a lot more disruption. That's certainly true in some instances. And so I think if I were to sort of capture something that we've all touched on this is there's no one way to do these things. And the best way to understand the way or ways that are going to work best for a community are by working with the people who are in those local communities. And that's how we're really going to close that last 7 million of those access and that last 80 million people who aren't online for other reasons besides the actual availability issue. Is really thinking about all the different possible ways to address this.
Yeah, thank you for that insight, Meredith, because I think definitely the advocacy piece on community, I think that's something that, again, given the fact that broadband access has never been historically at the forefront of our advocacy needs or agenda. There's also, honestly, education in terms of even folks like Lily and I are still learning what is the difference between broadband and internet again with those two words, right? There's that educational gap, and then also language access, right? It requires digital navigators, also advocates on behalf of community to help our community members speak up about their lack of internet access, device access, and digital literacy. And so as we wrap up the conversation, I want to kind of wrap up the conversation about government and community and private sector, but also start the last question we have is what is one thing you would like the audience to take away from this conversation, knowing that in the audience we have community members, we have private sector, we also have government. Unfortunately, we don't have local government on this panel, but Lily, I'd love for you to address either, your local government or one thing you'd like the audience to remember in terms of a call to action about digital infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. When I first started working on this issue, I was just as baffled as anybody else as how this could have been happening for the last 2 decades in the middle of Silicon Valley. And I know that you guys work on policy from like a much higher level. I would hope that you don't assume that that our government at the local level is as in touch or advocating for us as much as you may think that they are. Because when I think about why this issue exists in San Francisco's Chinatown, it's just easier to ignore it. It is a very, very difficult issue to solve. It's not something that you can just throw money at. We have a huge city budget. You can't just throw money at this issue. You can't get people upset. Like, there is no easy solution around building broadband infrastructure in a very dense place where you have to dig up concrete and get the entire community involved and the private sector involved and all of those permitting complications. It just has been easier to ignore this issue. And the pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities and the need for broadband in a way that we can't ignore it anymore. And I don't know, I'm learning about about all of the resources available. And I'm going to continue to learn. And I actually just welcome partnering with you guys. I welcome learning more. and I welcome your advocacy in the positions that you are in. And I think that I feel optimism. I think that we are closer than ever to fixing the digital divide in my Chinatown, but I think across all of our API communities, the conversations are very similar. So thank you so much for this, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Lily. And we'll just go backwards. So Meredith, then Kate, then Mario.
All right. Very briefly, I think this will be a familiar refrain, but I hear folks from NTIA and the FCC, others talk about this being a whole of government approach to solving the digital divide. And I think it's really broader than that. It's a whole of stakeholder, because the government's just one of the stakeholders: the federal government, the state government, the local government, private companies, local organizations. Like, no one entity or two entities can do this together. And so I just really invite folks to continue this collaboration and conversation, because that's how we're going to do this.
Okay, I would just say, I mentioned that the Affordable Connectivity Program is due to run out of money early next year. And if you have an opportunity to share your story and raise your voice about why this conversation and others like it happening in your community or elsewhere is so important, I would take it, whether that's online or offline. Make sure that the connectivity that you and your community needs is affordable and accessible, and let's keep this program going.
And I would just say that this truly is a once in a generation opportunity, right? We have to make sure that every cent that the government spends is spent smartly in a way to connect the unconnected, by providing availability to all that need it, and by supporting the right community partners, again, such as you all, that have insight into the communities in a meaningful way to get folks to adopt.
Thank you all. I mean, to wrap up, I would say that one, sharing, and two, just continuing to connect with folks, because we've worked with self-help for the elderly. I know some of us here have in SF, but this is my first time meeting you, Lily. And so there's always connections to be made and partnerships to be had to address this work. So again, thank you all for participating on our panel today. I think that was a lot of great information and stories for folks to take back. Thank you to APAICS for having us here today. And feel free to reach out to any one of us to continue the work addressing the digital divide. Have a great day.